Hello and welcome to the short introduction into PHPixie ORM version 3. The title of this talk is the best of two worlds because PHPixie ORM tries to combine the simplicity of the active record approach with some more advanced features we see, for example, in ORMs like Doctrine, like separation of the model into repositories, queries, and entities. As all the other PHPixie libraries for this 3.0 version, it features a 100% unit test coverage, and also additionally it is covered by functional tests up until 70%. It's tested on HHVM, and in fact it's also tested on all versions of PHP starting from 5.3 up until the nightly PHP 7 builds. So first let's look at what was the inspiration for creating this library. Here are some things that I like about Doctrine. This is, as I already mentioned, the separation of models into repositories, queries, and entities. It's the entities are decoupled from the persistence logic, which makes them easy to test. It's also that Doctrine doesn't rely on magic methods, and in fact it's very easy to trace what exactly is happening in the code, although sometimes it may be a bit harder to debug. And also Doctrine features Mongo support through the Mongo ODM. Now let's see some of the active record things that I like, which apply to a wide variety of ORMs that follow the active record pattern, for example like Redbin, PHP, and Propel to some extent, and Eloquent and Laravel. It's the gradual learning curve. It takes very little skill to actually start using them, and they are one of those things that are easy to learn and hard to master. Usually those are rather easy to debug, work out of the box, and prefer convention over configuration, which allows them to work out of the box. If you are familiar with Redbin PHP or even Laravel's Eloquent, you already know how easy it is to start using them, and this is something I wanted to preserve for PHPixie while combining it with the features described before. So apart from that, PHPixie adds some of its own to the mix. For example, there is no code generation, unlike, for example, Propel. There is the same domain-specific language for SQL databases in Mongo, and this is something that a lot of work went into, trying to conform these two different paradigms to a similar interface that can be used interchangeably, and that allows building relationships between Mongo and SQL databases. It facilitates cross-database relationships. Another cool feature is a very easy and straightforward hydration of external data. So if you obtain your data through like a custom database query from a cache or from any other storage, it's very easy to serialize and hydrate it into the model itself and use it as if you got the same data through the ORM. Query optimization, I'll be talking about this later on, but basically the PHPixie 3 ORM does a lot to select the best strategy for your queries. So for example, for SQL databases, it will always try to use a subquery whenever possible to avoid querying the database multiple times. It heavily relies on iterators to save memory and to actually prevent additional queries from being executed, because for example, when you are editing a preloaded relationship and removing something from it, instead of refreshing the entire set from the database, it can just tell the iterator to skip a specific item when it reaches it, and thus achieving the effect as if it was actually refreshed from the database and removed. There are a lot of those tricks going on that reduce the amount of queries that you need to run, while also not relying on saving every entity in some memory storage for persistence. So it does take extra steps to avoid unnecessary queries. The relationship methods, which often clutter the method space of the entities, have been encapsulated into properties to reduce the clutter and actually makes the relationships much easier and intuitive to use. There's also not a single static method in the entire library. It's all done through dependency injection, and the dependency tree is very linear and straight and easy to follow. So that's why it was so easy to achieve 100% code coverage for it. So let's take a look at a small quick start. So there is probably nothing new here if you've ever used an ORM. It's all very simple. It's like a basic CRUD. There is a repository, we create an entity, and we modify and save it, and then we use a query to get it. There is a small teaser, which is the end line. Notice that when we associate a post with a tag, instead of actually passing a tag entity, we can pass a tag query that specifies the tags to be assigned to the post. And in some cases, for example, SQL databases, the whole association and getting the tags can be done with a single query, which boosts performance and by reducing the number of extra queries to the database. Not a lot. This is one of the most important features of the PHPixie ORM, is that it has those multiple strategies for different types of connections. So for example, if your data is in different databases or you're using Mongo, it has no other choice as to fall to IDs and get IDs from the database, build a new query and like insert and update that. But if you're using an SQL database, it can do some transforming of the query, convert it all to subqueries, and execute that in one go. So usually after you've learned the CRUD, the first thing you do is try to extend the entity and add some methods to it. And this is usually where the hard part begins, because you want to test it. So let's see how is it done in the PHPixie. It's all based on the decorator pattern. The idea is that instead of extending the actual entity, you extend a specially designed wrapper class that all the methods of which proxy the calls to the actual database, to the actual ORM entity. This means that you can add your own methods in a normal fashion, but when you want to test your own code, it's actually much simpler. You're gonna see that. So from a user perspective, it's basically the same as in any other ORM framework. You just extend an entity, add a getFullName method that can get its first name and last name and returns that. Now you want to test it. Usually you would have to rely on a fixture and create an actual database to test this behavior. But look here, with PHP unit, we can easily mark the actual entity that our wrapper wraps around and mark calls to that, so that we don't have to rely on actual fixtures, and instead we mark everything totally abstract from the database, and our code that we added to the wrapper class knows nothing about the actual persistence and the underlying ORM. So this is a pretty standard PHP unit test, and it's going to be this much easier to test whatever you code in. Registering those wrappers that you have created is also done in similar fashion, in a very straightforward fashion. Instead of relying on a configuration file, annotations, or some other method that would require you to actually read documentation and learn and remember it, it's all done very simply through just having a simple wrapper class that is able to build all these entities. Like in our case, there's it can build a user entity which returns a new user and passes the entity into it, and all that we have to add here is our database entities function, which tells tells the ORM which entities should it wrap. So it's pretty simple, and the same can be done for queries and repositories. Now, usually in most cases you wouldn't want to extend the repository. Sometimes you would, but the other thing except entities that you would be extending are the queries. Now, extending queries is pretty much the same thing, and you would do this to encapsulate some very common criteria. For example, let's say that we consider a post popular when it has a comment count that's larger than or equal to 10, or it has views larger than some min views, something like that. So we add this to the query once, and then we can anytime we want to add these conditions, we just call the popular method and it's going to add that. Alright, so the DSL for constructing the queries is very versatile, and there is a lot to it, and there's a lot of work here to satisfy every particular popular style. So PHPixie ORM will never force you to write in a style that you don't like, because there are just so many to choose from. So there is let's look at this line by line. So the first one is fairly simple, like status active, where status equals active. That's simple. So the other one is a bit more complex. Let's say you want to compare a field to another existing field, not to a number. This is where the asterisk comes in. This is the larger than an asterisk operator. The asterisk can be used with all the comparison operators like equals, and it's going to compare fields instead of actual values, which is very useful sometimes. And you can also always pass an escaped expression, in our case it's going to be now, which is an SQL expression. Note how it's also all encapsulated into a class, and there's no magic going on here. So let's look at the method names now. There's where, and where, or just and if you want to be very short. There, the negation is also similar. Where not, and where not. Some people, for grouping queries, for grouping conditions, putting braces around them, like to use callbacks. You can do that. Some like to start and end groups in a carrying fashion. You can do that. Start or group, add a condition, end group. Or instead of building, sometimes you are building the query programmatically, and you don't want to build the start or group method to call it and create the or group. You can just start condition group or where status active and group. So there's pretty much every basic style here that you can use, and you might think why there's a lot of this where in conditions when it all could just be and or. This is for compatibility with the database library, because the conditions builder of the ORM actually extends the interface of the database conditions builder. So if you learn to use one facet of the ORM, you can easily, if you want to build raw database queries, those skills just can be easily applicable to the same thing. So a powerful feature is querying items. So you can query an item by ID, and it's all done with using the in operator. So if you want to query an item by ID, you just say post query in 1. This is where ID is 1. Or you can try multiple IDs, 1, 2. Or you can build a query for a specific post, which is post query in $post. Or nest a query, which is in query. And the in operator, as the where operator, can also have all these forms like not in or in. So if you already have a few entities, for example, and you want to update all the other entities, you can always say post query where not in current entities, update and do something to all the different ones. You can combine all of this, and you can actually pass IDs, entities, and queries at the same time, and it's all going to be optimized as I mentioned before. So for example, if your query is simple, it's not actually going to be a subquery. Instead, just the conditions from that query are going to be used. So it's going to optimize it to minimize the complexity of the query. And this is going to be a very common practice that you pretty much anywhere where you can pass an entity, you can pass an ID, or you can pass a query that would return entities, and it's going to use that. So for example, now let's look at querying relationships. This is where the related to method comes in. So like, let's say we only want the posts that have at least a single tag. We just say post query related to tags. Or let's say you want to have the posts that are related to a specific tag. You just say related to tags and pass the tag entity. Same as with in, we can pass here IDs and entities and queries. So this is all very intuitive. If you understood, like if you already know how to use one part of it, you can bring that skill to like a different part of the ORM. So for example, you can also add conditions to that the tags must satisfy, and just as with the conditions builder with where, you can pass a callback, you can start a related to group, you can negate and find untagged posts, or there is a very useful shorthand which I really like, where you just say where tags.name is PHP, and it's going to find all posts that have a tag with the name PHP. So now let's take a look at relationships. As I promised, unlike the other ORMs that clutter your entity model with a lot of methods like add role, remove all roles that then are hard to find using autocomplete, PHPixie encapsulates these methods into properties. So instead of having like add role, you would go roles add, roles remove all, and this is much more useful since just by typing user arrow, you can see in the drop down you would get in your IDE like the entities it has, like the relationship that it has, and then for each relationship property you would get to see the methods available for it. So let's see how that would be used with some actual entities. Like, let's see, we have some posts. Now we get a category, and to the categories post we add the latest post. We add a post query, we add a post that has an ID 2, we add a batch of those, and it also updates immediately our latest post entity to reflect that it's now is related to this category. This is done without an extra query to the database. So there is, like, as I said, like it tries to optimize as much as possible the amount of actual queries. You can also build queries from properties. For example, to create a query that would hold all posts that belong to a specific category, you can just say category, posts, and query. And to actually get the post, you just invoke the property, which is like the first line over there. Now, let's look at this example where we try to bind a many-to-many relationships, where we try to bind a lot of posts to a lot of tags. So as you can see here, a query has the same relationship properties as the entity has, and we can, to a post query tags, add the tags query. And usually a framework and ORM would first get the IDs of all the tags, IDs of all the posts, create a Cartesian of them, and put them in the pivot, which would take 3 queries, one for posts, one for tags, and one for insert. PHPixie for SQL databases will try and do all this in a single query. It's just going to be an insert query where there is a cross join between the results of the post query and the tags query. So there is this optimization going on even in individual relationship. So let's talk about the architecture here. So it's built so that nothing is executed at random, and because that would make it very hard to debug and test. So what exactly is happening is, for example, when a property is being called and asks, for example, let's add an entity to this property, it asks the handler to perform this. A handler uses planners to build a query plan. A query plan is like a set of steps that have to be executed. For example, let's think in terms of binding that many-to-many relationships. For non-SQL database like Mongo, what we would have is the first step would be to get the IDs. The second step would be to get the IDs of tags. Then there would be like a third step that gets the Cartesian, and the fourth step that does the insert. And then when the plan is built, the plan isn't executed within the transaction. So what this allows us as developers when building handlers is also not rely on the database at all. We don't need fixtures to test this, because all we need to do is run our handler with specific parameters and then inspect the plan it built and see whether it's correct or not. So all the testing, and in fact all the testing in PHPixie is being done without fixtures, apart from obviously functional tests, which the point of which is to test the ORM coupled with the database. So a query mapper acts in a very similar way to a handler. A query asks the mapper to plan it. Mappers then use the planners I already talked about to build the plan, and it's executed within the transaction. So if you want to try it out, it's very simple. Just follow this snippet, clone the repository, go to the examples folder, install, run quick start, and there is another demo also waiting there. You don't need to set up database. It's all going to be SQLlite in memory, and it's very easy to run it and play with it for a while. So I encourage you to follow PHPixie 3 updates, because the framework is almost ready. There's only a few libraries that still need some development. You can check, get more information on PHPixie account or at PHPixie. But there's also my blog, PHP.org, or my Twitter account, which I encourage you to follow, PHPGimp. And one more thing, the PHPixie templating library has just been released. Check out the examples. It's very simple to use. It's plain PHP, but it supports layouts, it supports blocks, it's very extensible. Sorry for this. It's very extendable, meaning that you can create your own templating language with it easily, but just by adding your own compiler. And PHPixie is going to handle actually caching the templates for you and all things like that. And it's, as I said, all the libraries are 100% unit tested, so you can actually try it out now. As for this talk, it can be found on our GitHub organization, GitHub/PHPixie, and I highly encourage you, if you want to give a talk and don't have the slides and just would like to talk at your local user group, feel free to take these slides and talk about PHPixie and help us spread the word. And especially if you speak a language other than English, these slides are going to be translated into languages. Or if you would like to give a talk and I would like the slides translated into a specific language, just find me at GimP and I will help you. Thanks for if you stayed until the end of this video. I would definitely love to have some people ask me questions and find me and just talk about PHPixie. So thanks, bye bye.